Jer si milostivi čovekoljubiv Bog i tebi slavu uznosimo, Otcu i Sinu i Svetome Duhu, sada i u vekove vekova.
In a world of shadows and secrets untold, where primeval stories make the brave go cold, mighty gods on high and realms below, whispers of legends that shape each soul. And nightmarish dreams, cryptids lurking, nothing's as it seems, giants walking, angels and demons fight, only truth can bring the light. Through the echoes of time the tales unfold, mysteries arise as the prophecies are foretold, from valiant knights to buried treasure, this podcast brings nothing but pleasure. Welcome to myth, mysteries and majesty. Study with us, and don't be a travesty. Theology, mythology, fantasy, and horror. Dungeons and dragons, Skyrim and Mordor. And Mordor, the powers haunt the evening, in gothic castles where they're screaming. Wizards cast spells in their towers tonight, exploiting enigmas hidden from our sight. Archaeologists make excavations deep of the ancient tombs where pharaohs sleep. In the dust of ages we chronicles keep, storytelling's power of monsters that creep. Myths, mysteries and majesty is the place for you to learn about this haunted space. From scholarship to manuscripts of old, unlock the secrets of wisdom and gold.
The topic of Nimrod has been drawing so much attention lately, especially when it comes to not just people who love biblical theology, archaeology, and history, but also religious Christian podcasts that deal with fringe and supernatural topics. So welcome to episode 190. I'm very privileged and honored to welcome another biblical scholar. For me, one of the VIPs on the podcast so far. I'm so grateful for you, Professor Doug Petrovich. Welcome on our channel. And if we can maybe start this podcast by you introducing yourself, telling us something about your work, where you're coming from, church affiliation, when it comes to the position you're holding at the university.
Sure. It's great to be with you, Nicola, and it's great to be with all of your guests, all of your followers. Thank you for having me. It's a privilege to talk about a topic that I've done a lot of research on. So I've been a professor for basically about 30 years now, and I'm an interdisciplinarian. So biblical studies is part of my specialization. I have 3 degrees in biblical studies, and then I have 2 degrees in ancient Near Eastern history and archaeology. And that's from the University of Toronto. And my emphasis, my major was Syro-Palestinian archaeology, which basically is the study of the archaeology of the Holy Land. So that's ancient Canaan, Israel, Phoenicia, and Syria. And my first minor is one of the ancient languages, which is Egyptian. So that would be, and I've studied 3 years of hieroglyphic Egyptian, that's Middle and Late Egyptian. And all of that learning, I never expected it, but went into my first 2 books that I published, basically the first ever attempt to identify Israelites in Egypt for the 430 years that the Bible says that they were there. So maybe at some point, Nicola, if you're ever interested, we could talk about that on a podcast. But that's just one application where the Lord just dropped this into my lap. The discoveries involved with Israelites being there for the period that the Bible says they were. And for our podcast, I took a year-long course in the study of the archaeology of Mesopotamia. I kind of went in there kicking and screaming because my professor promised me that for my last year's coursework in my PhD program, I could study and I could do an independent study on the archaeology of the late Bronze Age in the Levant. And I was all excited about that, went into his office as classes were about to start for that fall semester. And I think he probably forgot that we had made this promise. And when I reminded him of it and asked him, can we talk about the details for it? He shrugged his shoulders and said, I think you're going to be way better off if you're in a class. And it just so happens that our world-class professor, Dr. Clemens Reichel, one of the world's leading authorities on the archaeology of Mesopotamia, you can take this year-long archaeology course with him. And I remember kind of my heart sagged because most of my study with my advisor, with my the professor who I had the most courses with, most of the courses we studied were in northern Levantine archaeology, meaning ancient Syria. And I was part of a dig there that he led. And I was all excited to do this on the southern Levant, and God instead, puts me in Mesopotamian archaeology. And I thought, well, this is a waste of time, but I guess I'll, take the course and see if I can do well. And of course, in this PhD program, you have to have an A- to continue in the program. So for me to get into the comprehensive exams and the dissertation, I had to get an A-. And, it's hard enough getting that kind of grade in a PhD program like this, where they demand so much of you. But when your heart's not in it, it's even harder. So during the course of that first semester, God really opened my heart up and gave me a love for the archaeology of Mesopotamia. So hopefully a little bit of that will come out today in what we talk about. But I've been a believer since either 1978 or 1979. I don't know which. I remember I was baptized on the 14th of October, 1979. So that dates me. And I've been a part of mainly evangelical churches where I've gone. But in certain places, there was a need to be a part of a certain denomination. And so I jumped right in a denominational church. And even when we went to Russia for 10 years and built a seminary from scratch, we worked with Baptists there. And I had never been Baptist before or worked with Baptists. And so that it was a bit of a baptism for me, but it was a wonderful experience, probably the best 10 years of my life. And I'm just very thankful for all that God did. And really at the end of the day, all of those things, the things we use to divide ourselves from each other, that's not in God's ideal world. He created one church, and that's the church that Jesus Christ is the head of. So I'm currently in evangelical Bible teaching church in the Houston area, in right outside suburban Houston. I live in Richmond, and it's in Katy. Some of you may have heard of the city of Katy. So that's a little bit of answering your question. Maybe I didn't answer it all, but hopefully I came close enough.
No, that was perfect. Thank you so much. We have our friend PJ. He's a good podcast friend. He is a Christian, and he makes Christian tabletop material and willing to share everything for free. He's been using a lot of his spare time, skills, and gifts to create all of these D&D games for Christian, people and nerds like me. And he just jumped in the chat and he said that he loves your heart already because of how the way your heart speaks when it comes to unity between churches and denominations. Mm-hmm. And that shares my heart because years ago, I know that as we started talking briefly before we went live, coming from Orthodox perspective and Catholics, for us, everything would seem as idolatry, and this is bad, and you're going to hell for because of this. And then one of my former Moody professors once asked us in the classroom, he says, what prevents you from having fellowship with, people from other faith traditions? And he meant Catholics and Orthodox. And that started changing my heart and my mind. I'm like, well, instead of assuming what they believe and why do they believe certain things, why not humbling myself and asking them to explain? And when they started to explain, I'm like, okay, some stuff do make sense, some stuff maybe less, but still, that doesn't mean I will practice them. I don't have to condemn you. I can still have fellowship and love. And that connects, when I was starting the podcast, the motto was unity in diversity. And now when you're saying how you mingled and managed to do ministry with Baptists and many things that we would argue when it comes to theological issues and doctrines, hey, when you're sharing life with someone, when you're like depending on that unity of small circle of people to persevere together, it may be, you know, life circumstances in Siberia are not wonderful, then you're there giving your best to love that person and hopefully receiving the same. And by doing that, you're enjoying this community of Christ's love with each other. And one day in the eschaton, I don't even know what will God say when he'll be probably shaking his head when he tells us, seriously, you guys were like arguing and fighting about this. Didn't I tell you to go and love each other and, you know, spread the gospel and do the Great Commission? So I just want to say that I add on PJ's words that we love your heart, that it speaks of unity and brotherly love. By the way, when I was reading part of your biography, Dr. Petrovich, when it comes to being in Siberia for 10 years, I salute you. I was amazed because not many Western Christians would go to a remote place like that, especially spend 10 years, live in cruel circumstances such as freezing temperatures. I'm not saying it was freezing all year round, and do the God's work for 10 years. Can you please, if possible, summarize within a minute, how was that experience? I know it's not connected with this topic, but still I'm very curious.
Yeah. I always look back on it so fondly. It was an amazing time. It's hard enough to build a seminary from scratch in your own culture, but do it in a foreign culture where you don't know the language, you don't know the people, you don't know the thinking. And I had to learn all these things, and my family, you know, we had to learn all these things. And boy, it was just amazing. You know, it takes, you have to humble yourself every day, and you have to focus on love. You have to focus on the people that you're there to minister to. And when you do that, all the other things just kind of fall by the wayside. You forget about all the cold you endure. And the first year I was there, I had first degree frostbite on my nose because, you know, I grew up in Ohio and we had snow, and I thought, what's the problem with snow? I've had snow before, but I had to come to understand Siberian cold is a little bit different than I grew up with. So yeah, there were lots of inconveniences. You know, in the United States, if you have a list of 10 things you want to do that day, 10 chores to get done, you go out, get in your car and do them. Probably you can do them all, maybe 9 or 8 for sure. In Russia, if you plan 10 and you get 3 or 4 done, you've had an amazing day. So there are lots of hindrances. Things go slowly. But boy, I'll tell you what was most phenomenal for me. I grew up in northeastern Ohio in a Serbian community, right? We spoke English, but it was a Serbian ethnic community that my parents were a part of. And I didn't really understand the values that they instilled in me and the Serbian people instilled in me until I went to Russia. And that's when I understood that I was different. I knew when I was growing up, going to grade school in the United States, I was different than the other kids. I just didn't know why and what made it all so different. But when I got to Russia, I understood. Russians are very people-oriented. They're not clock and time-oriented. It's all about people. And in Russia, it's wonderful because you can just show up at the door of a friend or an acquaintance, knock on the door, you're welcomed in, and you can expect to spend the whole evening with them. And they're glad to have you. They're not angry because you didn't schedule this 3 weeks in advance, right? So,
and you're welcome to eat all of their food, right?
They'll offer you all their food, right? Everything they have, they will offer you. And sometimes some of the people we were with, they were so poor, they either didn't eat meat or they could eat it one time a week. And and they gave their best, even if it's just bread and potatoes and cucumbers and tea. Even if that's all they have, they'll offer it to you. And they may not even know how they're going to pay for their next week's meal or whatever. They're putting it all out in front. So, boy, there was so much for me to learn, and the Russian people were amazing. I wish you all could get to know Russian people and Russian culture. I mean, I understand all the political things and all of the things related to warfare. That's a whole different thing. The Russian people, they're incredible.
I have to admit that this story and your experience and testimony really blessed me. And I love especially the part when you said that since you were growing up, I'm paraphrasing what you said. In a way, God was preparing you when it was your time to live for Russia. You needed time to adjust to the weather. But when it comes to people skills, when it comes to warmth of the heart, when it comes to communicating, sharing everything, you already received it from your family and from your community in Ohio. And it just blessed me because that I can only imagine how much of a blessing was that to you when you went there. You didn't need that much time to adjust.
Mm-hmm.
And probably when they heard your last name, you'll be like, oh, you're one of us. Welcome.
Yeah, they considered me to be like a cousin. And I remember when we had graduation there, right? And I was the academic dean and the assistant to the president. So I was the one who was, handing the diplomas and shaking hands. And when I grew up as a kid, men kissed men in the Serbian community, and it was normal, right? It's not something weird like most Americans would view it. So Russians were the same. And so when it came time for me to hand out the diplomas, I kissed them all on the lips, every single one of them, right? And they were amazed, first of all, that I would do that, because they know that's not an American, trait. But it's spoken about in the Bible, right? Greet one another with a holy kiss. That's brothers to brothers in the Lord. And
yeah, well, wait. Do you mean you kissed them in the cheek, not in the lips?
No, lips. Yeah.
Wait. I'm just telling you honestly, in Serbia and other Balkan countries, we don't kiss each other in the lips. We kiss 3 times, like the Trinity thing. Uh-huh. We kiss each other 3 times in the cheek.
Like the French women?
I don't know, so I can't compare, but we don't kiss in lips. Yeah. Like cousins and friends, when you see them, especially if you didn't see them a long time, we all kiss. Doesn't matter if they're male, female, older, younger, we all kiss them three times in the cheeks, but not in the lips. So this is new to me.
Okay, now you know. That's how I grew up, and I still do that with my father and my brother.
Wow, yeah. See, a lot of these cultural differences, they sound so weird to Westerners, and I understand that. It's not just the Westerners. If I meet someone who is coming from, I don't know, Middle East or Africa or Asia, some of their customs may sound weird to me, and vice versa. They may be like, hey, that's too much. I know, like, because I do love children. I don't have children myself. So if I want to play with kids my friends have in the church, and if I would do something like that, they're like, hey, you're not a pet. You don't do that here in America. So it's like everything is so different. I would be weird to my own friends.
Yeah.
And again, it speaks volumes when it comes to adjusting to each other culture and knowing, well, this is actually the language of love, the way we express love back home. But I know you can't explain to everyone. Wow. Okay.
Well, let me just clarify one point. All of our students were male. None of them were female. So, there was nothing nefarious going on.
Oh, I believe you. Yeah, but thanks for clarification. Well, this was a very lovely introduction, Dr. Petrovich. When it comes to the topic of Nimrod, what led you back in 2013 to start? Well, maybe you started researching before then, but what led you in 2013 to publish the article, which is, by the way, publicly available on academia.edu. All you need is a free account. You can download Dr. Petrovich, all the articles he has there available. They're for free to download. What led you to start researching, and then 10 years after that to put all that material into the book?
Yeah, and I suppose it was a process. I suppose there are lots of steps in it. Maybe at least I can go back as far as when I was a seminary student in the 90s. I took a course that I just loved. I specialized in biblical languages, right? And even from then until now, I've taught every level of Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, and every level of biblical Greek. And so as a student, though, I took a course, the Exegesis of Genesis 1 through 11. It's basically a third-year class for Hebrew students. And in that class, we had to do a lot of things, but one thing was we had to translate the entire passage for ourselves from Genesis 1 through, part ways into Genesis 11, up until Abraham kind of comes into the picture. And that process already got my mind thinking, right? And that contributed to, that demanding task contributed to my conviction that I need to study the original text itself, right? And what that developed in me when I got to Russia. So my main job, I was assistant to the president, academic dean, and I taught more classes than any of the other teachers who were there. Not because I wanted to teach more, because they didn't want to teach as much as I did. So I was busy, but on the side, our church that I was a part of in Siberia, there was a Bible study in a neighboring city called Berdsk. So we were in Akadem Garodok, which means academic city, and the smaller city, about 25 minutes by car or bus, was called Berdsk. And there was a Bible study there started by an American, and he left the ministry because of a fallout he had with the regional pastor of the Baptist Union there. And our church kind of viewed the Bible study there as like a younger sister or brother kind of thing. And so they asked me, the church asked me, because nobody else would volunteer from the church, to take over the Bible study and turn it into a church. So basically be a church planner. So on the side, I was a church planner. How many people do you know who have a full-time job and more, and then they're a church planner on the side? So, it meant that I was sleeping 4 to 5 hours a night kind of a thing. But you find a way to do it. And it's like everybody says, in the mission field, there's just so much more going on. You wear so many more hats. But the point was, when I started preaching, and immediately we started meeting Sunday mornings, which they hadn't been doing. And I started preaching, and I preached using the Greek Bible. So they didn't know that. The church members didn't know that, but I had a read United Bible Society Greek New Testament, and I never preached from English or Russian. I preached from the Greek New Testament. And in the beginning, I needed a translator, but eventually I was preaching on my own in Russian with the Greek New Testament with no other tools, right? And nobody told me I had to do that, but I knew in my heart I needed to, because I want to give them straight from God's word as he gave it to the original authors, right? And that kind of conviction is what God built in me. So my Genesis 1 through 11 course in Hebrew, that laid the foundation. And of course, I translated the passage in Genesis 10 about Nimrod, and I wanted to understand that more. Then when I got into my Ph.D. program, and started this Mesopotamian archaeology course. And I think it was around 2011. So I was an older student. I didn't graduate until I was over 50. So if you think you're old and you can't do something, you may surprise yourself if you have enough motivation for why you would do something like that. But in that course, we started studying throughout all the history of ancient Mesopotamia. And we studied the life of Sargon of Akkad, the first empire builder. And in studying that, I just kept saying to myself, as I see what's going on in Sargon's life, it almost sounds like this guy's Nimrod. And so I opened up Genesis 10. I looked at it more carefully. I looked at my translation, which I brought with me from the United States. And, I literally brought the notebook that I had my handwritten translation in. And I looked at it, and then I said, wow, this is possible. So I started studying it more carefully. And next thing you know, I was in Canada at the time. But next thing you know, I realized I think this is a match. I think this is the right guy. Everything seems to fit more cryptically in the Bible, more thoroughly explained in the life of Sargon of Akkad, the first empire builder, the founder of the Akkadian Empire. So that's kind of the main parts of the process that got me there. And when I published it, of course, I submitted it to peer review. It had no problem going through peer review and got it published. And from then until now, if you go to my academia.edu webpage, and I forget how many, it's in the hundreds of thousands of views, but if you add them all up, but among all of the resources that I put up there, including all my published articles, which I just had my 11th one accepted for publication, 10 are already out there. Of all of those that I've published, by far the one that's accessed the most is the article on Nimrod. And it's like, seriously? People are that interested that it would be number one? I would think, several of the others would be number one. This one was. And that really motivated me to writing the book.
Thank you so much for that. There's a question. I know it's connected. It's not connected with Nimrod, but it has to deal with your preaching. The question says, what English Bible version do you preach from now?
I'll go back. I love telling this story. I'll go back to an encounter I had with my third Greek professor. He was in his last, 5 or 8 years of teaching. So he was up there in age, and he went to be with the Lord several years ago. I think he died at 89. Dr. Robert L. Thomas. And I jumped into a course with him. It was a Greek exegesis course. I think we were translating and studying some of the parables of Jesus. And I knew that there were several classes that came before ours that did the same topic. And I was used to a different professor at it's the Master Seminary, same institution, who, what he would do, he would give us the exegetical digest that had been compiled by all of the classes of students before us that had been edited and improved and all that. And then we would work with it and try to improve it more. So I went to Dr. Thomas, it was my first class with him. And I said, Dr. Thomas, in Professor McDougall's courses, here's how we did it. Don't you want to give us the work of the other students that, came before us? Because, why reinvent the wheel? So he smiled. This was in class, right? I asked him in class, all the students around him. And, you could hear a pin drop because he's a serious guy. So he has a little wry smile on his face. And he said, Douglas, the danger with standing on someone else's shoulders is that you both may fall. And that was a bolt of lightning. Wow. So for me, I only teach and preach from my translation. I will not teach or preach if it's not my translation. So I translate it all into English, refine it as much as I think I need to, and then I can start the actual studying process to prepare for the message. So it's always my translation. It's never an English translation that someone else has made.
But for the rest of us, I had bachelor's in theology. I had Greek in 2 semesters, but I don't know Hebrew. And even with Greek, I can't translate any more difficult technical sentences, especially when it comes to Paul's epistles. Do you have 1 or 2 of those either Bible translations or Bible studies that you would recommend? When it comes, would you recommend more ESV or NASB or NET or NIV? Which one would you suggest?
Yeah, there's none that I suggest. I'm studying the passage in and out, and if I fault in any direction, I want to err in the direction of spending too much time on my own just with the text, not with certain authors, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we've lost a lot of that art and a lot of that that primary commitment. It's like with ancient Near Eastern historical studies. You better study the primary texts more than you study the modern texts that interact with the primary text, because the primary text, that's when it happened. So, there are several, for just about any Hebrew or Greek book of the Bible, there are certain exegetical commentaries that I will enjoy studying. And, it depends on the book, but, I try to do that study after I've done all my work first, because I want to see what I've missed. I want to give myself the chance to work toward understanding and gaining that knowledge that the text has, that it's not just, kind of quick, easy fix, getting it from someone else quickly for free. I want to study it. I want to understand it and then see what I've missed. So that's kind of my approach.
Okay, just have one brief comment on that, and we'll switch back to Nimrod. I want to say I appreciate that old school approach instead of just, I'm just going to Google the answer. I'm just going to use ChatGPT to write a sermon, or even the skeleton. If you're called to be a professor or a pastor, it's okay for some sources or to correct or give you maybe some extra information, but to write the skeleton of your book or your sermon, it's soulless. It's not fair to God or to your flock. So I just love what you said, because he puts all the hard work on us, in this case on you, and it's like, God, I'm going to give my best, and you help me get to the best translation and the best exegesis and interpretation for these people that you sent my way. So I just want to say, I really appreciate your your effort and the way you approach these things. Okay, when it comes to biblical passages that speak about Nimrod, I know that you mentioned in your PDF Genesis 10, First Chronicles 1, Micah 5. Maybe we can start from these passages where Nimrod was mentioned, and then we can go from there after that with some historical sources, Nimrod's genealogy, etymology of his name, and things of that sort.
Sure. So how do you want to go? How do you want to go forward?
Well, if first you want to give to the people who don't know where to find Nimrod in the Old Testament, maybe we can start first. If you would tell us where, what does the Bible speak about Nimrod, because it doesn't say too much, and then we can go from his genealogy, also some historical sources, and then we'll continue after that with some cross references that you did with Philo, Josephus, and stuff like that. Sure.
And Nicola, is there any way for me to do a screen share? Do you ever do that with your guests?
Oh yes, of course. Are you using Chrome maybe?
Yes, I'm using Chrome.
Perfect. If you see in the lower part of the screen, there is this computer screen and then sign plus.
Yes.
Okay, click plus and then share screen. Okay, do you want to share like a PDF or presentation or the whole screen?
Whole screen. Let's just do the
whole screen. Okay, now when you click there, you have Chrome tab, first option, second option, window, the last option, entire screen. So click entire screen and then share.
It doesn't, it's grayed over. Also share.
Well, click on the window that you're sharing underneath entire screen that says, and then the share button.
Oh, there it goes. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So yeah, let's just start looking at my own translation of the passage where we see the most, where we learn the most about Nimrod. And I'll just walk through it from verses 7 through 12. And by the way, oddly enough, many other scholars who've written on Nimrod trying to identify him, who is he in the historical record, they don't even add verse 7 into the equation. They just start with verse 8 and go and move along. But 7 is really important to all of this. So that's where it begins. The sons of Cush, and by the way, I'm going to just stop right there. The sons of Cush. This easily could be written Kish. The vowels here are, you can do what you want with vowels, because the original Hebrew didn't have vowels. So we're only hopeful that we have the right vowels that were added in by the Masoretes, probably in the centuries AD, maybe 2nd, 3rd, 4th century AD. So that's not, hard and fast. And as English speakers, we could change the C to a K easily. So it could be Kish. The sons of Cush or Kish were Seba, Hawilah, and Sabta, and Ra'amah, and Sabteka, while the sons of Ra'amah were Sheba and Dedam. Now Cush, all right, so we're back to this guy here, sired Nimrod. Now the Hebrew word here for siring, and I chose a word that's as close as I could come to a word that's different than fathering, because the Hebrew word here is not restricted to fathering. It means that it's a person in the line of the one who is born. So it could go back just that one generation to the father, 2 generations to the grandfather, or, theoretically to infinity, as long as that's a person in the line. So Cush sired Nimrod. And again, the text is not telling us is that his father, his grandfather, or a far removed great-grandfather. And then it says this, that one, and that's, a reference to someone, lots of names in all of this, but it actually goes directly back to the nearest antecedent, Nimrod. That's the only person we're talking about here as we start this sentence. And it's almost like they're pointing a finger at him, right? That one, Nimrod, acted irreverently in order to become powerful on the earth. So right away, right from the get-go, you learn a lot about this guy, Nimrod. He was dastardly in what he did by acting irreverently. And it shows us his goal. What is he attempting to accomplish in this irreverence? Well, there's a greater good. It's not just humiliating people. It's not just being on a power trip. There's more than that. He wants to become powerful on the earth. So he wants to be a person who is distinguished as, again, humanly speaking, great on the earth. So this is all about putting himself in a place of recognition that's above every other person. And then it says, he became a powerful slaughterer. We'll talk about that in a minute. What does powerful mean here? In the sight of he goes on existing. And that, by the way, is the literal translation of the covenantal name of God. As I always tell my Hebrew students and my Greek students when I teach Greek as well, whenever humanly possible, especially with names, but whenever possible, you want to give a translation, not a transliteration. And certainly if you're going to give a translation, you want the correct translation. I'm guessing that most English Bibles that those of you who are looking at one now would see here would be something like the Lord, with maybe capital letters for Lord. Well, that's not the word Lord. The word Lord in Hebrew is Adonai, and this is not Adonai. This is Yahuwah, the covenant name of God that comes from the to be verb that emphasizes the ongoing nature, right? Because it's a present imperfect verb. Imperfect, and Nicola, you may understand this better than most, but as an imperfect, it means it's not completed action. It's action that just continues. That's the covenantal name of God. It's continuing action. What's that action? Well, it's actually not action. It's a state of verb. It's ongoing existence. That's the emphasis of the covenantal name of God. He wanted his people. This is Exodus 3 stuff. He's meeting with Moses, burning bush, and Moses keeps begging for his name, right? He wants to know, who are you? Because the people are going to ask, what's the name of the God that revealed himself to you? So he forced it out of God, and God gives him, for the first time in human history, that, according to the Bible, was that covenantal name. And that name emphasized an attribute of God. And Nicole, you probably remember this from your Moody days, but we always learned about the difference between communicable attributes of God and incommunicable attributes of God. Communicable means that God can give us that attribute and we can apply it for ourselves. Love, right? Love is a communicable attribute of God. He can love and we can love, and he expects us to love, right? Well, there's one attribute among others that is incommunicable, and that is God's omnipresence and his eternality, right? And many passages in Scripture, of course, speak about and refer to his eternality, that, you know, he existed before the creation of the universe. He exists now, and he will always exist. It's almost like a loop for us, but it doesn't make sense to the human mind, but to God, it makes perfect sense. He always existed, and he wanted to communicate that to his people, that he is the one who goes on existing. That's who he is. So the point is, Nimrod became, so he accomplished what he sought out to do and to be, right? This powerful person on the earth. He sought that out and he accomplished it. And Moses is affirming that he pulled off this trick. And he did it, as Moses notes, in the sight of he goes on existing. In other words, it didn't happen in a vacuum. Nimrod didn't slip one by God. It wasn't just happenstance or, good fortune on his own when God was busy elsewhere doing other things on the earth. No, all of this was right in front of God, meaning that God ordained all this to happen. And God allowed him to continue in it, conquering city-state after city-state after city-state, slaughtering men, slaughtering women, slaughtering children. And if you look at the iconography, the drawings that the ancient people made of Sargon of Akkad and others in his era, you can see what this would have looked like. It was bloody. It was vicious. It was cruel. Probably the only people that I know of the ancient world who could rival the Akkadians led by Sargon of Akkad was the Assyrians of the first millennium BC. So this is late third millennium BC with the Akkadian Empire. So he goes out and he's slaughtering people there completely in front of the eyes of God to see, on account of which it is said. So in other words, his biography was so unique and it was so different. It was so, for the first time, someone was this vicious that there came a saying from it. So on account of it, it was said, such and such, related to some person of their day, right? Of the person's own day. That person is as Nimrod, a powerful slaughter in the sight if he goes on existing. So great conquerors, great strategists, great imperialists, empire builders, they had a blueprint, and that blueprint was Nimrod's, and they wanted to be like Nimrod. So it became a saying that if they accomplished certain great things, that now they could be compared to Nimrod. So that was taken as a compliment to them. So it was just a commonly understood statement. Then verse 10, now the starting point of that's Nimrod's kingdom was, and I'm putting in what I'm convinced are the best options here to understand this, Eridu, Hebrew word is Babel. And by the way, I haven't come out with my 5th book yet, which is almost half written. I'm still working on my 4th book. So I have to get the 4th book out and then I'll finish the 5th book. But in my 5th book, when I'll be dealing with the biblical history, basically from the flood until Abram. So the flood to Abram, I will be devoting 2 chapters to try to persuade the reader that the city in Genesis 10 and 11, that in Hebrew is Babel, that is not the Babylon of Daniel's day. That's not Daniel's Babylon. The right Babylon, the right Babel, is Eridu. Lots of reasons for this. This would take me, 2 to 3 hours to walk through it all, so now won't be the time. But this is, according to the Sumerian king list, Eridu is the first city that was given a king, and for them, for the writers of the Sumerian king list, which is a very important ancient source, They said before the flood, but I would take that to be a mistake that they made several hundred years after Eridu actually popped up on the map and became a great city. So Eridu is known to be the first city. It's the first urban center in the history of the ancient world. There were lots of sites that we could even call not only towns, but cities, if you want to use the term city, but not with true urbanization. What does that mean? There are lots of characteristics to define what's an urban center. There's usually a very strong central authority led by a king and some number of aristocrats or people of power alongside him, maybe royal, maybe not. There's also a scribal class. There's monumental architecture like public buildings, temples, built very exquisitely and with enormous size. There's a city wall. There's what we call canalization. So that's basically it's like the sewage system, but it's a combination. Could be used, there are parts that could be used for different. It's sewage to get bad things out. It also could be an irrigation channel to bring good water in, and anything else that needed to be done within the city to have the water system accomplishing something for you. So on and on, there are other things, but Eridu is known as the first true urban center. So that's a better choice for biblical Babel, in my estimation. Uruk, that's the sister city of Eridu. So as Eridu is growing up, and you probably aren't too familiar with Mesopotamian archaeological periodization and all the different periods that are involved. You can actually get a copy of that. I've got it uploaded to my academia.edu webpage, so you could download that document from there. But Eridu and Uruk start together, just about together. Eridu probably starts just a hair before, basically at the very beginning of the Ubaid period. That's the period, the overall period in Mesopotamian history that it's called, the Ubaid period. And Uruk shortly after that gets off the ground. And they both continue to be occupied through the Ubaid period and through the Uruk period. And so Uruk is growing up next to Eridu. It's like the kid brother of Eridu. Then Akkad, and that's an important city because that city, the city of Akkad, became the city that was the capital city for Sargon of Akkad. He built that city up from, I don't know exactly, it's either you could call it a town or, a small community, but he built it into a formidable urban center that he called Akkad, and this is the source of the Akkadian Empire. This is their capital city that we haven't found until today. Nobody has discovered where Akkad is. And if we could, probably there would be one or more archives, textual archives that could reveal all kinds of things about the Akkadian Empire and other things going on both before and in some cases maybe even after. So those are all cities that, and what Moses is doing here, he's starting a list that goes in one direction. If you know Moses and you know how he likes to treat geography, he has this tendency where he likes to go one spot, one location at a time and fulfill the entire picture in an orderly fashion. Perfect example, the borders, the promised land borders. He goes one direction at a time, right? The 4 points on the compass, north, south, east, and west. He walks through them in a complete circle. And it's helpful to understand and try to figure out where the sites were located that were on that path because he uses this orderly accounting. And we should expect nothing different of him here. So what he does here, he goes from south to north. That's exactly what he does, south to north. And before him, the center, the beginning, the foundation of ancient civilization as we would picture it, right? Not just people living, but true civilization based on the urban landscape package, right? Moses gives us this order that goes from south to north. And he says, and all of them were located in the land of Shumer. Bingo, there we have it. That makes sense because history tells us that Shumer, southern Mesopotamia, just to the northwest of the northern shore of the Persian Gulf, you can look that up if you want, if you're not familiar with it, that whole area basically defined by, so Mesopotamia, as the rivers go down, the Euphrates and the Tigris go down, they come toward each other, and there's almost a little bit of an effect like an hourglass. And so where the point where the two rivers come closest and then bend back apart, that essentially more or less segregates southern Mesopotamia from northern Mesopotamia. And the part that is in focus here, the land of Shumer, it's the Hebrew word Shinar, but translated it's Shumer, that is where his kingdom starts, right? So it starts with Eridu, continues to Uruk and to Akkad. It doesn't mean that those are the only cities, by the way, of southern Mesopotamia in Shumer that were his. All that Moses is doing, remember, this is a very cryptic biography. He's hitting the high points. There are probably lots more cities involved because there's no way you can take those three and not control most or all of the other cities of Shumer. It just wouldn't work that way. And from our study of the early dynastic period that came before this, we know that's true. A king could not get these three crown jewels without having virtually, control of virtually all of Shumer. So, verse 11. From that land, meaning the land of Shumer, southern Mesopotamia, from that land, he, Nimrod, went out, and there's no preposition here, but I'm just adding, wherever I have words in italics, that means I've added a word for the reader. Either something's visible in Hebrew that the word isn't there, but Hebrew is clear enough that it deserves to be there, or I've added it for context to help you kind of get the relationship, because prepositions are words of relationship to tie things together. So into is the perfect preposition to get us where we need to go, because it got Nimrod where he needed to go. He went out from that area, the plain or land of Shumer. And remember, we're going south to north, further north, etc. So you continue to go north. Where do you hit? You hit the land of Assyria. Well, guess what? That's exactly how Nimrod built his kingdom and overtook Mesopotamia to become the world's first empire builder. He started with Shumer, and he spread his wings from there. And certainly the jewel for him as far as lands to overtake was directly to the northwest in the area of Mesopotamia, in Mesopotamia, northern Mesopotamia, and the environs around there. So it's no surprise that Assyria is a part of this. It has great sites, it has great lands, it has great resources, and it's right in the middle of a hugely important trading network that goes, basically all directions. But most of that goes through the land of Assyria. So to conquer Assyria is truly a great accomplishment. So that's what he did. He went out into Assyria and captured that. And of course, later in history, in the first millennium BC, Assyria, well, even in the second millennium BC, but even more so in the first millennium BC, Assyria asserts itself on a massive scale, and it becomes its own empire. A much futuristic empire, but so basically think of it this way. Sargon is setting the stage for all that's going to happen in future history. He's conquering lands. He's bringing the technology that they have from southern Mesopotamia there, because that's the technological center of the world, right? And he's bringing weapons, and he's bringing military practice, and he's bringing ideas for further conquest, and he's bringing ideas for the making of tools and utilitarian items and so forth. So basically, as he conquers lands, he's upgrading those lands that he conquers. And, unless there's a wrench thrown into the system here or there, and that can happen and does happen in the ancient world, unless that happens, those lands are like, never to go back to the way they were. Once you bring them into that world, they stay that way. So it's no surprise that he more or less prepared Assyria for its later ascendance into greatness, humanly speaking. And then he focuses on several of the cities of Assyria. Again, not an exhaustive list, but a very representative list. It says, and he built up Nineveh. We know that from Jonah's day. That becomes a very great city. So probably Nineveh was very small when he arrived. But then when he's finished, it becomes a much different city than it was. And so it's no surprise that it becomes one of the principal cities of the Assyrian Empire throughout its prominence. There's the Old Assyrian Empire, the Middle Assyrian Empire, and then the Neo-Assyrian Empire. So Nineveh would remain a great city. Then Rehoboth City and Kalhu, that's another city that eventually in the Neo-Assyrian Empire would become one of those capital cities. Again, there were multiple capital cities. The first was Ashur or Asher, and then you have others such as Nineveh and Kalhu. Then he mentions Rezin, which we don't know a lot about, but he says that Rezin is located. So Rezin being located between Nineveh and Kalhu, which is the great city. And by the way, just a real small footnote, it's my view that this mention of which is a great city, Kalhu, because Kalhu never became a great city in the 3rd millennium BC. In fact, it didn't even become a great city, if you compare it to the other Assyrian cities, in the 2nd millennium BC. It's not until the 1st millennium BC in the Neo-Assyrian Empire that it became a great city. So right or wrong, it's my view that this relative clause here, right, with the relative pronoun governing it, this relative clause is a later scribal addition to the text by a Hebrew scribe, probably in the 8th century BC or so. Maybe the 9th century BC, probably the 8th century BC. Whole different discussion on scribal updates. That's a topic on its own. Nicola, if you ever want to, we could focus on that some show, but I think that that's in reference to Kalhu's future. So there's that. Okay. I'll just do this, Nicola, and then maybe you can suggest where we go from here.
Yeah, this is especially interesting to me, especially because when I check Septuagint, in Genesis 10:9, it says for Nimrod that, well, for the word mighty, it says gigas. And I was also checking Hebrew, gibbor, and we know that gibborim were used in Hebrew in Old Testament for giants, for Nephilim. So this is where, at least for someone like me, it's becoming more and more interesting. So please, help us decipher the word and etymology, so we can go there.
In fact, that word is part of what I want to do next. So what I'm doing is I'm putting up. I think that the New American Standard is probably the closest English translation to a good literal rendering of the text. It doesn't mean that, I wouldn't make changes everywhere. I would, in virtually every verse, I would make minor changes, if not semi-significant ones. But it's about as good as it gets, the New American Standard. And this is the update edition. And it reads, now Cush became the father of Nimrod. So, again, this is my emphasis here, that the Hebrew word, you can study the use of that Hebrew verb there. That verb is not one that it's a direct relationship between a father and a son. It can be many generations different. It can be hundreds of years different. So all that's important is that it's someone in that genealogical tree. So I just do not like this, I do not like it, Sam, I am. I don't like became the father of Nimrod, because he's not the father. He is a great-grandfather of some variety of Nimrod. How do we know? Look, it tells us clearly. That's why you can't ditch verse 7. Who are the sons of Cush? Let's count them. There's Seba, there's Hawilah, there's Sabta, and there's Ra'amah, and Sabteka, right? So how many sons does Cush have? Direct sons, father to son. 5. They're named in verse 7. Don't disbelieve it. Don't believe that Moses is forgetfully leaving out someone here. That's not what's going on. So just to amplify this, just to prove this to a greater degree to you, look at this. What continues? While the sons of Ra'amah, who's Ra'amah? He's just one of the sons, right? Of Cush. So the sons of Ra'amah were Sheba and Dedan. So what Moses is doing is he's giving us, and probably it meant more to the Israelites than it means to us, but he's giving us the names of 2 grandchildren of Cush, direct grandchildren, through this man as the father. So what is that telling? Now we've got 3 generations represented here, and Nimrod isn't even in the picture yet, is he? He's not in the picture. So why isn't Nimrod listed generation by generation from Cush to Nimrod? He's not listed that way. So we come down here. Now Cush sired Nimrod. So again, Moses wasn't just forgetful in verse 7. He's jumping ahead in the book about 6 chapters to where a later person, one who wants to put the spotlight on Nimrod, he wants to focus on this guy only. He's saying, now, here is the genealogical connection, the only one that you need to know. He comes from Cush, right? So Cush is the forefather. It's Cush's line that goes to Nimrod. Nimrod doesn't come from the same line that you do, Israelites. He comes from a different ultimate line. Again, coming out of the days of the Noahic flood, right? So that being true, became the father of? No, that is a very deceiving way to translate this. Very deceiving, and it's possibly, I would say, even downright inaccurate, and therefore needing to be improved. So siring is better because, again, you can take into account multiple generations. The NAS translates, he became a mighty one on the earth. No, there's a word for became. There's a verb for that. This isn't it. It's this. He acted irreverently. This is doing something that's sacrilegious. That's what it is. It's something that makes the ears tickle, that good people don't do, that is unacceptable culturally, right? Pretty much across the board. That's what this verb is pointing to. Nimrod acted irreverently. He was profaning. That's another verb that works here. He profaned. And since that verb is so kind of out of use, in fact, I would have made that as my preference. I wanted to put something in here that would have more teeth to it. So I wrote, acted irreverently for profaned. So the new NAS says he became a mighty one on the earth. And I say, no, that one acted irreverently. And then there's a lamed preposition here that talks about a resultant effect, right? With the result that, or in order to, with that goal in mind, to become powerful on the earth. Now, verse 9, this one I do not like so well. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Now, with the word that's here, the Hebrew word for that's translated hunter here, that is a possibility. Okay, it's not. There's one passage I know of in the Hebrew Bible. Maybe there's more than one, but I don't think so. There's at least one passage where clearly the idea of hunter is involved. But really, this is a verb that we can only, it's used so seldomly in the Hebrew Bible. if we go to other Semitic languages that have a cognate of this verb, in other words, they're two related languages. They each use the same word. They pronounce it a little bit differently, but it's basically exactly the same word. So if we go to those other languages, those cognate Semitic languages, we can glean more from this word. And basically, it has to do with either the act of the taking of a life, and in most cases, it's used in textually, written in text. It's used of an animal that's being, for example, offered on an altar as an offering to a certain god, right? So it could be the act of sacrificing the animal that this word would be used, or it could be the actual food itself, especially if it's a noun or a participle, right? So it could be, and really, it's like a generic word that's so big, I don't even know if there's a perfect English word for it. So probably the closest thing that works is a foodstuff, right? A foodstuff, some type of food, right? So again, one or the other of those is taken into play. But since in the grammatically the way the word is used in Hebrew here, and it's almost certainly with that sense in mind, the better translation is to say that he's a slaughterer, one who kills. It's like, the person with the knife or the machete who, lops off the head of the whatever animal it is, the chicken or, you name it, and cuts it down so that it can be sacrificed, or it can be, divided up for the food and distributed to people as meat and so forth. So, my grandfather, long deceased, was a butcher, so he knows what this is all about. This is being a butcher. So that is way better than the more obscure meaning hunter. Because, folks, think about it here. If you look at that whole narrative of what's going on in the biography of Nimrod, is there anything here that's fun and friendly? No way. Hunting is what you do on the side when if you're a king, an ancient king, you've made your conquests and, you've sent the booty back to your city and you have the slaves captured and they're on their way back. And now you're on your way home. But before you go home, you decide, hey, let's take some time and hunt a little game, right? So you take out your sniper's rifle, and you go for your deer and shoot it. And you try to show off your exploits and your ability to hunt down animals. So there's nothing fun and games about Nimrod's biography. So hunter is a terrible translation here. Far better to go with slaughterer.
So he seemed to be a man hunter that would butcher them. That would be like the best explanation of the whole passage. And he was doing it for profane, for irreverent reasons, which, again, I read in your PDF, but also my mind inevitably leads me to Genesis 6. This just seems a sort of continuation from what was happening in Genesis 6:1-4, and this is post-flood era. So this makes me thinking, well, then is Nimrod just one of the Genesis 6 Nephilim that keeps doing profane things in the sight of God, which may result if we get to that point of Genesis 11. I didn't want to interrupt. I just wanted to put some of my thoughts as I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, and now we'll go to the word that you were asking about, okay? How do we translate this word in green? Now, most translations follow this idea. Maybe even it goes back to the King James of 1611. I don't have that memorized, but it probably does. And that word, it's a verb. And here's the thing. You always want to be careful with your reader to make sure you're giving your reader, right? If you're a translator, you want to give the sense that closest parallels what you're convinced the original author was trying to get across. This is something instilled in me when I was at Moody Bible Institute, and I imagine, Nicola, same for you. You couldn't walk away from your time there without that having been just impressed on your mind. It's all about the original author's thought, right? So what do you have to do to understand that word? And I always, I teach a course on elements of Bible study, and I always tell my students, I always have them do, as one of the projects in the class, to do a word study. So study a word that appears only enough times in the Hebrew Bible or the Greek Bible that has parameters you can kind of wrap your arms around. Study all the context of where it's used, and then take some of those from that study selectively that are helpful, that add nuances that are important to establish the overall usage of the word, and then do a deep dive into each one of those individual passages that you pulled out from the comprehensive total, right? And that will help you kind of build an understanding of the range. And here's what it comes down to: the range of meaning of that word. Now, with this word, that gibbor, that's the Hebrew word gibbor, that's translated, variously. If you study enough of the usages, you'll see something very important, and that is its breadth of meaning includes both negative connotations and positive connotations. What does that mean? Well, a perfect example, and Nicola and I talked about this before we came on air. The fallen ones, and I like to use the translation rather than the transliteration. The fallen ones, the ones who fell from something, they're called several things, not just one thing. But one of the things that they're called is gibborim. What does that mean? If you look at the context, there's nothing good about these individuals, kind of like Nimrod, right? In a different vein, but they're just negative top to bottom. They're dastardly people, individuals. In fact, I won't go there. That'll take us away. But that being true, when I translate Genesis 6, where it says gibborim, I don't put mighty there. I don't. You know why? Because this same Hebrew word noun, gibbor, or actually it's an adjective that can be used substantively and therefore as if it's a noun, right? So that word is used of David's mighty men. Now, that term, David's mighty men, it's so well known in Christendom, and I imagine even before that with the Jews and with the Israelites, so well known that it has this positive connotation to it. These are David's best warriors. These are the good guys. These are the ones who go out and risk everything for David because he's their king, their beloved king, and they're going to die first before he does, right? These are great warriors. They put themselves and their lives on the line every single day for David, and they're not afraid. Same with the man that he killed, right? He had killed Bathsheba's husband. That guy would do anything for David, wouldn't he? He doesn't even want to sleep in his own bed when he comes into Jerusalem. So that connotation of the mighty men of David it's such a well-known term that the reader, right, the believer, is locked in, is fixed in with that word mighty, that it's going to be someone good. So in my mind, it's not wrong to translate it mighty. I'm not saying the NAS was wrong to translate with this word. I'm saying it could have done better to take away the ambiguity and lead the reader in the wrong direction, right? Because of the context that it's, again, all negative, none positive. Way better to translate that a powerful one. He became a powerful slaughterer in the sight if he goes on existing. That meant he went from city to city and he took his army. His army was more powerful. They had probably siege engines. They probably had methods for accomplishing a siege of the city effectively. And they took out cities in open pitched battle. They're the ones who won the battle, right? They were more powerful and they slaughtered everybody that came their way. And basically nobody stopped Sargon of Akkad. God gave him that touch, that, I don't know, kind of like negative Midas touch. Then instead of turning it to gold, he turned it all to red blood. But God gave him that touch just like he gave Alexander the Great that same touch. So everything he touched turned to blood. He was a powerful slaughterer before the Lord. And then I would do the same for these in verse 9. Okay. Thoughts, Nicola?
Okay, we have one question. The
Sure.
question goes like this. So in a weird way, did God allow Sargon or Nimrod to, conquer, this was a question from about 30 minutes ago. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Okay.
When he conquered, when he brought his technology and all of that. So the question is, did God allow Nimrod to do this because Nimrod was, quote unquote, building up and advancing other people in technology? The conquered people were making progress due to Nimrod or not? So that's like, it's a question out of curiosity. Yeah.
That is a wonderful question. I love that question. It really shows thought. And yes, I would say that's not the comprehensive answer, but that is definitely true. And here's how I want to relate it. Okay. And I just taught in one of my courses, I think it was in my geography course. We were going over, it was biblical geography. We were going over the peoples of Southern Europe, right? And one of that was the Greeks and the Macedonians. And so I paused to talk about how Alexander the Great set the stage. Okay. Think about this. This is so important. When Paul comes along, he's converted in a moment, right, on the road to Damascus, and all of a sudden he becomes this incredible Pharisee turned evangelist missionary guy. And he's flying all around the ancient world, especially to the north and up into Europe, right? And people are repenting and becoming Christians, and churches are starting, and he's discipling, and others are spreading the message and discipling, and great things are happening. And now that there's church after church after church that's founded, all of a sudden Paul realizes, we've got problems springing up, right? It's like a leak in your car. The radiator leaks. You can't just let it keep leaking. You've got to plug the hole, don't you? So Paul says, we got to take care of this. So what does he do? He gets out his big pen and he starts to write. He writes and writes and writes and writes. Next thing you know, he's just written a whole slew of letters. Now, these people are from different cultures that he's writing to, different than one another. Cities that represent regions and people groups different from one another. How in the world is Paul going to write in such a way that they can understand what he's saying? Because probably they don't speak Hebrew. Well, it just so happens that God sent Alexander the Great to conquer Asia Minor, which is ancient Anatolia, which is modern Turkey, as just the beginning. And he went down into the Levant and took most of the cities without force, right? Kind of like Hitler driving into Austria in his Mercedes and just taking over, right? Signing himself the lease to Austria. So he takes all these cities. Of course, Tyre was an exception. That had to be besieged. He goes down into Egypt and he just takes Egypt. Egypt gives itself to Alexander the Great. And then after he wintered there and after the winter, he goes off into Asia to the east and he conquers, Babylonia and all the peoples around there and all the way to India and slightly further. It's crazy what he did. It's unprecedented. Well, it was a terrible thing what Alexander the Great did. All the slaughtering, all of the imperialism, all of the, taking down of leaders and, you name it. Lots of bloodshed, lots of terrible things. But in its wake, what did God do? He turned the whole ancient world into a Greek-speaking world. Now there was a common language that Europeans and Asians, or Asiatics if you prefer, and Northern Africans all could understand just as well as one another. And with that vehicle ready to run, right? It's like the Mercedes crew that makes the Formula One car or whatever that it's going to win the race. It's all ready. All they need to do is start the race and let that thing hum along. So that's what God did. And when Paul needs it, he's got that universal language of Greek that he can apply. So Alexander the Great, was it just happenstance? Was it just, again, God out of control and or busy elsewhere and man just took over and did what he wanted? No. It's not man doing what he wanted to do. It's God foreordaining that whole ancient world would be prepared for the gospel in one language. That's what he did. That's what God did. Alexander the Great, I don't see Alexander the Great when I look at Alexander the Great, although I know a lot about him. I taught 9 hours about Alexander the Great once in Russia. But wow, I see Paul when I see Alexander the Great. So it's always a bigger picture with God. It's not the small picture. So yes, it's so true that that God was going to be doing things in the wake of all of the evil that this powerful slaughterer had performed. He's not the show, folks. He's the opening act. That's it. That's all he is. He's not the big entertainer. He's not the fight at the end of the card. He's the bantamweight that nobody knows the name of. That's who Nimrod is compared to what God was going to be doing. So yeah, that's very true.
Thank you so much. I'm not qualified to speak on this behalf, but as you were talking, my mind went to not so much maybe Roman Empire, but British Empire. Of course, we're not defending people enslaving each other, abusing and using each other. But despite that, if we will look as a positive side, the natives of whatever land the British would go, hopefully, and I think they will have better access to cleaner water, maybe medicine, maybe some supplies, and also the gospel. So I'm seeing here that despite the evil, which God did not provoke, God did not intend, God did not plan, I see something like in Genesis 50:20. Yeah, the enemy can use certain purposes for evil, but despite that pain and suffering and injustice, God can come and heal and bring hope and restoration through the power of the gospel. So British Empire was taken in an aggressive way that I'm not approving. I'm not saying anything good about it. But despite all of that, things like slavery or aggression or people being abused, people were also able to hear the gospel for the first time in some parts of the world. So I'm like, see how God can use in the most darkest moments of our lives, in the most hopeless moments of our lives, God can open the door and send the light in your life that you would never dream of, you would never expect. So again, like I'm saying, I'm not historian. I cannot speak like you can speak on that same level when it comes to this question. But I was thinking about British Empire, how God still was bringing people and souls to himself, despite what the British people were doing that was evil.
Yep. That's right on.
Yeah. And another thing is that several months ago, we did 2 lengthy episodes on this book that is only $5 on Amazon. It's called God of the Gaps by Hugh Henry and Daniel Dyke. And it's a very good book because we use it to help people understand that, hey, if you want to believe in young earth, that's fine. But don't believe that the earth is old only 6,000 years. Just because you're counting genealogies. And one of the biggest arguments is that the word Yalad, according to these authors, does not mean father-son. It doesn't mean parent-child. It actually implies that the best translation means ancestor-descendant relationship. I'm currently in chapter 11, where the authors speak about Yalad in Exodus. So over and over again, they're proving that there are gaps in genealogies, and that many times certain names will be left just to prove certain spiritual or theological point. So when you were speaking 20, 30 minutes ago about something similar, my mind went to this book, and I was like, oh yeah, what Dr. Petrovich is saying, he's not alone. When people also, when you're also saying that, are these 3 cities the only one that Nimrod won? No, these 3 were the probably most important or most well known, but there are like probably a plethora of other cities. In the same fashion, when we see genealogies, including Jesus's, there's so many names left out for different reasons. But when people, the original audience, the original recipients of those letters, when they'll be reading, I'm like, oh, okay, this means this means this. And in the same way that Abraham would be their father, but he wouldn't be their biological father. Sometimes they'll be reading, about Abraham 50 generations after he was born. but yet they will call him his father. So that's a very good point that I want to cross-reference so that people will not think that everything the Bible says, it's only that, and it's in a most literal way where you're not allowed to think this or that way. And if you do dare to think this or the other way, you're not taking God's word seriously. And because of that, you don't trust the Bible, and thus you're going to hell. I've met people like that, mostly online, not so much in person. And I hate when they condemn each other because they don't have the tools how to dissect the word of God, how to apply hermeneutics. They read everything in the most wooden way, and God forbid you disagree with them, including the age of the earth, you're going to hell. So I appreciate what you're saying. It perfectly matches with this book.
Excellent. And Nicole, let me just take a minute. And while maybe there's a person or two who's thinking about sending a question, and please do if that's the case, I just want to show a few pictures because some people are more visual oriented, and I think this would be helpful. Again, if I'm correct, and the journal article I wrote does the arguing for me, and the book that I followed that up with, it just came out in 2023, does that for me. So I'm not going to try to persuade people here of all of the different elements. We're just hitting high points, but I want to just show a few pictures. If I'm correct that Sargon of Akkad is equal to Nimrod, then just take a look at this, okay? At the iconography, what they're visualizing. And remember, this is for ideological purposes. The person who is the great conqueror, who is the king or whatever, they're propagandizing. They want other peoples to know how great they are, how many nations they conquered, how many kings they subjected to their rule or killed off, right? How many prisoners they took, how many, talents of gold and silver that they acquired in their conquest or whatever. But just look at this. And yes, all the good parts are missing as far as the body of the conqueror of Sargon, but we have an arm here, right? One arm here, and you can see the muscle. They're depicting him as being very muscular. There's the hand of the other arm here, and it's holding, this was the weapon of choice in the 3rd millennium BC. Even in Egypt, by the way, this is the mace. The mace is responsible for the invention of the helmet. Why? The number one goal of the mace, and you could use it for different purposes, of course, but the number one goal, and I'm not saying it's depicted here, but notice the proximity of the head of this person and the mace. The idea, in battle is to use the mace to bash the head of the enemy soldier, because if you do that, even if it doesn't kill him, it will incapacitate the person. So he is knocked out of battle with one strike to the head by the mace, because the mace usually is consisting of stone, some type of stone. It's usually going to be a heavy stone, not a light stone. It's not sandstone. It's probably not marble, but it's closer toward that, a limestone or something else. That's a much harder stone with weight to it and striking the head. So that's the mace showing the power of the man. But look at the perspective of the height of the person here. You can't see his feet, but he goes up, and this is just the shoulder area. So the head's going to go up to about here. Look at the comparison with these guys who are in this net. They're all tiny little fellows. Who are they? Prisoners. And you may or may not be able to tell, but they're buck naked. That's part of the deal in the ancient world. You defeat your enemy, you kill off as many as you can, the rest surrender, and the surrendered that you don't kill, you strip them down, and you essentially put them in nets or chains or whatever it is that you use to hold them together so that they can't go anywhere. So these are small representations of people who are part of the losing army. This is a depiction of Sargon. This is his victory stela. It's in the Louvre in France, if you want to go see it. But you can see him here with these bearded, and he has this long, I don't know, kilt, if you want to call it a kilt, I suppose. I don't know if dress is the best word to use. You can see that he has his weapon here in his hand, and then he's followed by all of these soldiers here. This is probably an attendant who is shading the sun or showing some type of protection for Sargon. These are axe-like weapons that they're carrying. Obviously, the way they draw, it's not exactly as artists today would draw, but this is what they did in Mesopotamia. It's going back again very far. Here is, I had an artist do this for me for my book cover to make it look really nice. So he did this to kind of clean it up and fill in the blanks, right? So that it's all here. And there he is carrying a mace, Sargon, off into battle. Notice the men who are laying down. These are deceased soldiers who died in battle. And again, they're stripped. So it's, R rating. And I apologize for that. You probably didn't expect that tonight. And then from Sargon's victory stela, and you can't see this very well, there are men strewn all across the ground here. Here you can see the head of a man. There's his eye, and he's probably pointing his face upward here, looking upward, but dead. Here's a dog, and there were lots of wild dogs in the ancient world. And here are vultures who are, or other birds of prey, but possibly vultures who are flying in and dropping down on the carcasses and ripping away, stripping them, eating them, gouging their bodies. And that's the scene that exists after a battle. Vultures take over, wild dogs take over, and there are beneficiaries to the carnage. I guess it's the best way to put it. And then this is Sargon's victory stela drawn, so you can see a little bit more graphically. This wild dog going after the head of this person, these vultures swooping down, eating the genitals. I don't know why they depict that. Eating the heel of this man. These are men below, so they're kind of stacked on top of one another, showing how many were killed. And then you have the text that's written below in cuneiform. And then this is the image. Just for fun, I had my artist draw this for me for the front cover of my book to kind of depict Sargon with a large hand and holding his powerful mace here. That's the city of Akkad right there, that stars representing Akkad. And these guys here, he drew this so well. He's a professional artist. He taught art at a university, but he's showing that these are ghost-like people here just pleading for their lives, kind of in darkness, caught in the net of Nimrod as he raises his arm in victory over his conquerees. So just thought you'd enjoy seeing a little bit of the depictions of the carnage that was involved.
Yeah, I believe that all of us learn better when we don't always have to imagine something, but also see the images, especially if they're coming from the original authors or someone who lived in that era, so that we can perceive, and learn more. I mean, even the first Christians up to the late medieval times who were illiterate, they were using, they were learning about the gospel through frescoes and icons. So this reminds me of that. So we can always appreciate art.
Yeah.
Dr. Petrovich, because time is flying and I don't want to be disrespectful to your time, so we can switch to the last segment of this episode. I'll just summarize what you've been saying lately. Basically, Nimrod is explained as, or depicted as, rebellious, irreverent, profane, powerful, not in a heroic way, slaughter, manhunter. And because you switched to and start giving more examples or more parallels with Sargon, maybe before you give more evidence and comparison, if you can maybe briefly explain why do you reject one of the three best rivalry parallels with Nimrod, because some see that it could be Gilgamesh or it could be Ninurta or maybe Pharaoh Amenhotep III, because for each of these you give brief explanation. Maybe if you can summarize this within a few minutes. I'm especially interested in Gilgamesh because of he was depicted 2/3 divine.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And I would say, first of all, my view on this is text driven, right? It's the scripture itself. And when we study the text, it seems abundantly clear, right? We walked through the whole biography. It seems abundantly clear that what Moses is communicating, it's not a tall tale. It's not a story about supposed gods, which of course, the Bible's replete with references to other gods as not even existing, right? They're just wood or gold-plated material of some kind that depicts something in nature, usually an animal or a humanized form of some supposed god. But the text seems to drive us to the inescapable conclusion that this is somebody who is 100% man, right? He's 100% man because his lineage is given with precision. There's the forebearer, there's all the sons, there's 2 of the grandsons, and then we slip down, again, some X number of generations down to wherever Nimrod fits in the genealogical tree. And Moses may not have even known how many generations, which would explain clearly why he didn't give us the person by person, like he does with the tree, the part of the tree that goes to Abram, because that's a very clear spelled out. But still, Nimrod is rooted in humanity, 100% humanity. So all views that are less than 100% humanity, for me, they kind of fall by the wayside. So let me start with the easiest one, Amenhotep III. So he is one of the great Egyptian pharaohs of the New Kingdom. There are several who are great. He's not as great as others. There are several who are much greater than he is. He has a long reign. His reign primarily extends into the 14th century BC, the 1300s. The conquest of Canaan under Joshua goes from 1406 to 1400. I'm 100% sure on that, right or wrong. So his reign begins, and I think his reign begins in 1407, the year before the conquest begins, and that it extends several decades into the 14th century. Well, what does that do? That makes him way too late to be able to be Nimrod. Why? According to the early Exodus view, which, my apologies for those who hold the wrong view. The right view is that it's 1446 BC that the Exodus takes place, and 1406 starts the conquest. So that being true, Moses has to die by 1406. He has to die. And Moses could not have written about Amenhotep III because Amenhotep III only came to the throne the year before, or the same year, probably even the same year that Moses dies, probably less than a year. So he doesn't have, Amenhotep III doesn't have the clock, doesn't have the time to be able to accomplish any of the exploits of Nimrod. None. Now, this view is presented by a scholar, an Egyptologist, and I included it in my book because, and even I think it's in my article too, right? Because I wanted people to see what are the scholarly views? What are the scholars holding to? One scholar, Kurt Setta, so he's a German scholar, long deceased, he held this view. So I attempted to, and hopefully accomplished, refuting that. And then let's see, what's our second one in the middle, Nicola? So there's Gilgamesh and...
Yeah, just a second. Yeah, Gilgamesh, Ninurta.
Ninurta. So the problem with Ninurta is, as I talked about before, he is 100% a god in one or more of the pantheons of the ancient Mesopotamians, right? So there's no question about his identity. There's 0% humanity, 100% deity. So I cannot get around the fact that Moses is so careful to give a whole genealogical tree, or a partial, if you prefer, genealogical tree, but still detailed, partial genealogical tree of Nimrod. And so that being true, to assert that it's someone who's a full-blown deified figure, a false god, if you will, a god in a pantheon, that for me is an automatic buzzer. Doesn't even work. So Gilgamesh, and I guess I didn't really review his biography, Gilgamesh's biography, so I don't have a lot that's kind of on the tip of my tongue to say about Gilgamesh, but and you may even, Nicola, remember more than I do in my article, but Gilgamesh it's uncertain if he is a historical figure or not. Some scholars are convinced he's not historical. Others are convinced that he's fully historical. And then you have some people kind of with a foot in each view. I don't have a settled view on Gilgamesh. I probably lean toward his historicity, but he, if memory serves correct, he supposedly accomplished some things that seemed to be a little bit over the top, a little bit, going above and beyond what seemingly a normal human can accomplish. So that's, kind of a strike against him. Another thing is where he fits historically and chronologically in Mesopotamian history. He doesn't fit in the right time. He's earlier in time before you have the advent of an empire. And, whether you agree with my view or not, that it's Sargon of Akkad, that Nimrod's Sargon, I don't think you can get around the fact that Nimrod, whoever he is an empire builder. Look at his conquests. He conquers all of Mesopotamia, virtually all of Mesopotamia, and he goes beyond, further to the northeast, and captures Assyria. So, and if you look further at Sargon's biography, he captures not only that, he captures all the way up into Anatolia, all the way into Syria, ancient Syria, and Elam and other parts of the east, and down to the south, down to the island of Bahrain and elsewhere. So he's capturing people all over the ancient world. And he's kind of stands out, whereas Gilgamesh is not taking over the world as it was known, right? So it doesn't seem to be a perfect match. And what I think our responsibility is as students of the Bible, we've got to make sure we're making as close of a match as we can with the Bible. And if let's say we couldn't even get a person to equate with Nimrod. If somebody, there was an offset, there was a disconnect between Nimrod and Sargon, then guess what? If it's a clear disconnect and I can't get around it, and there's no way that it can work, then I would jettison Sargon in a moment, because I believe in the text more than I believe in my ability to find the right person. So that's kind of how I would approach those three individuals.
Okay, I have a question from the same friend who is interested if, based on what you said about Nimrod, especially in your translation, does it mean that Nimrod, because he was a slaughterer of people, does it mean that there could be a chance that he was a cannibal?
Is there a chance that he was a cannibal? Wow. That's a fascinating question. Nobody's posed that to me in all the years that I've talked about this. Let me put it this way. I can't say that it didn't happen. I can't say it's impossible. Now, I would believe it a lot more if Nimrod came from somewhere like Indonesia. I would buy that as a more, stronger possibility. We don't have a lot of records in ancient Near Eastern historical texts of cannibalism practiced. So it would be a true outlier characteristic or practice. And with nothing to go on that suggests that would be a good possibility, I would say the likelihood is pretty low that would be the case. But having said that, I can't rule it out. It's not impossible.
So I think that his question, I can't read his mind, but his question would make perfect sense if we would be studying the topic of Genesis 6, Nephilim, giants, and if the Hebrew word used for Nimrod is a gibbor. So if hypothetically speaking, Nimrod would be partially giant, and giants in First Enoch and in the another apocrypha book that deals with giants and giant wars that were depicted as cannibals. In that context, if we were trying to make parallels and stuff like that, I would like his question makes sense, because if the giants were, depicted as destroying, the ecosystem, devouring everything, and eventually even people that could have even, resulted flood to come, then I understand this question. Well, if Nimrod comes later with the same thought and maybe similar mixed DNA, well, will that make him a cannibal? So in that fashion, I understand the question. But then you said that Nimrod, just the word is used for him as the powerful and mighty, but actually that doesn't mean he's of the same DNA as those who came in Genesis 6. So
True.
that's the only resemblance.
Yeah, because those guys are all killed off in the flood, right? They don't survive the flood. They go the way of all of other mankind, apart from Noah's family, where they're taken out. Yeah.
I only have one short question, and we can be done unless you want to share more. I will encourage people to please buy the book. I just went and checked the PDF version, and this is the screen. It's only $10, people. So, like, if you would sacrifice 2 coffees, and sometimes it's even one with tips based on the state where you live, you can have book permanently. And I always encourage my friends in the church, my online friends, the audience, to spend more money on education and books. And some books are worth it keeping your whole life. So Dr. Petrovich attacks many more things in his book. He covers many more. He uses archaeological data. He does exegesis. He explains so many Hebrew words, because if he did it so thoroughly in a PDF file that is maybe 30 pages, imagine in a book that is 200 pages. So do yourself a favor, buy the book. As you can see, got maximum reviews, maximum stars. That will be a nice gift for yourself, and you can learn more, because we don't want to spend hours dissecting everything that is in the book. But basically, yeah, that's the title of the book, and you have the Amazon link in this video description. But Dr. Petrovich, my question to you would be something that has been intriguing me for years. Is Nimrod somehow connected with the Tower of Babel and its building as the final sign, the final act of, like, I'm being rebellious against you? Because Nimrod is understood by some Bible commentators and researchers to be, one of the earliest, rebels against God. And if the Tower of Babel was built for that purpose, for people to become independent and rebellious against God, is Nimrod somehow connected with the tower?
Yeah, and that notion goes back all the way to the intertestamental period, right? So the ancients also were speculating or, musing about the idea of whether Nimrod could be involved with the Tower of Babel. Not to be a salesman, but here's what you got to do. To get my full answer on this, and even if you borrow the book from your friend, make your friend buy it and you just read the chapter. Read the introductory chapter. Because I deal with this in the book, not so much in the article, but in the book, because I know it's a problem. I know it's an issue. I know people are, wondering about this. And so I kind of deal with it more fully there, but let me just kind of hit one major part of that argument now that really, I think, kind of sinks the ship for the idea. For me, as an archaeologist and a historian, right? So sometimes I put on my exegetes hat. Sometimes I take it off and put on my archaeologist hat, or my historian's hat. For me as a historian, honestly, and I don't mean to be disrespectful for the people who hold this view, but I look at that and I laugh, because it's amusing that the idea to a historian, right? To a historian who understands the ancient world, right? And that's what my Ph.D. is in. So, I was swimming and bathing in ancient Near Eastern history and archaeology. But here's the thing. With Babel, whether I'm right or not that it's Eridu, with Babel, you have the first urban center. No question about it. This is the first true urbanized city in world history. And what comes with that is the form of rule, this centralized governmental rule that doesn't exist in earlier periods. If you study earlier periods, you can look at sites like Göbekli Tepe in Anatolia, that's modern Turkey, and other sites, and you'll see that they have huge, in some cases, huge villages, towns, even you can call them non-urbanized cities if you want. And in one, up to between 4,000 and 7,000 people in one place. But they didn't have a king, right? They were all just normal people. And their houses were built contiguously, which means they have shared walls. They literally had to climb up onto the roofs, and they would walk on the roofs, kind of like, what's his name? Tom Cruise, right? In one of his Mission Impossible movies, walking across the roofs, and then there's a ladder there to get down into your house. And you have to know where your house is, right? Just looking at the rooftops. So that's what the world had been, but with Nimrod, but with Babel, of the Babel of Genesis 11, you have a new day dawning. And with that, you have a king, and you have a court, and you have the aristocracy, right? Again, by whatever titles and roles and so forth. And it's only after, quite a bit after, the advent of this first city. So Eridu's first, and Uruk is second for an urban center, and then it grows from there. Only after that, and you see them popping up all over the place, right? These city-states, we call them. And they all have their own city wall, defensive system, monumental architecture, elaborate temples and other things and whatnot. And then when you have this array of city-states with kings ruling over, all of a sudden there's the desire to take other kingdoms, right? And so they start going and taking out other kingdoms and kings and incorporating them into their own territory, like Sargon does, and like Nimrod does. So that being true, the time of the Tower of Babel, it's a time where there are no kings, except maybe Eridu has one, and we don't even know when a king came into play in Eridu. It could have been, at the end of the Ubaid period or near the end of the Uruk period, and I'm convinced the end of the Uruk period is the time of the post-Babel dispersion. And again, I'll be trying to prove that in my 5th book. But you cannot have simultaneously. Okay, so Nimrod conquers many city-states. And again, we talked about this. The ones listed in Genesis 10, that's just the tip of the iceberg that goes way below the surface of the water. He knocks out lots of city-states and lots of kings. But yet the time of the Tower of Babel, you got to think about this. There were no city-states. There were no kings. It was all just in the preliminary phase. So conceptually, even the idea that Nimrod would be connected with the events of the Tower of Babel, to a historian, it makes absolutely zero sense. It's totally two different eras. It's apples and oranges era-wise. So no, Nimrod can't be connected with the Tower of Babel. It's a totally different historical era with a whole different set of things going on.
Dr. Petrovich, I really enjoyed this almost couple of hours. I apologize for extending this episode, but we had so many good questions and comments. I really wanted to make people happy, and I think it all benefited and contributed to the episode's quality. I'm very thankful, and I'm looking forward if we'll do an episode or two more in the future on some similar topics, or maybe completely different ones, maybe those that you cover as a professor, or those that you're including in your books. This is the last part. This is the last question. It has to deal with the episode's conclusion. When it comes to concluding thoughts, I'm asking you now, not maybe so much as a scholar, as an archaeologist, as someone who taught as a professor, but maybe more as what we heard in the first part of the episode, for you as a missionary, as a preacher, learning about all of these things that Nimrod did, all of these things, what would be the practical advice to us as the body of church, how to act, how to live in an opposite way than Nimrod? What would be your advice and we can use this to conclude the episode?
That's a great question, Nicola. That's a really great question. And let me kind of launch into it by doing this, by going back to the purpose of why Moses would even include this. To be honest, Moses probably could get away without even having to mention Nimrod, right? I don't think it's essential to the Pentateuch or even to the book of Genesis. It's not essential, but there is a purpose. He does it for a reason. What is that reason? Remember, God, in that time that God meets with Moses, God reveals to Moses the qualifications for what a king, what must be true of a king for you, Israel, to have a king over yourselves, right? And there's a bunch of those qualifications. I won't go over them all, but it has to be a man that God has chosen. It's got to be a man who's their countryman. It's got to be a man who doesn't go after silver and gold. It's got to be a man who doesn't have many wives, right? These are the kinds of things that are requirements. And you think about it, it's kind of crazy. This is hundreds of years still before Israel even ever sees a king. Why do they need that? Because God knows the day's coming when they will have a king. And remember, for God, a day is as 1,000 years, 1,000 years as a day. He's not bound by the watch. He's like the Russians. Just strip off the watch. It's not necessary. So that's God's perspective. But let's see, I lost my train of thought. Let me see if I can get it back real fast. So the purpose for Moses is he knows Israel's going to have kings. It's going to happen. But he wants them to know the short biography, the blueprint, like a picture on the wall for all the kings to see. What happens when it goes really wrong, right? Your goal, in other words, it's like God through Moses speaking to the future king. Your goal is not to conquer all of the nations around you. I'm not making you the number one conquering imperialist country of history, right? That's not what God wants to do. Now, could he have done that? Yes, but it's pretty much against God's character, isn't it? That doesn't represent him. Israel's supposed to be a light to the nations, not a wine press, and the nations are the grapes, right? So God wants to infuse in the king. He wants to put a terrible taste in his mouth, like vinegar, right? Or lots of lemons, so that the guy says, oh man, I never want to be about the business of all I'm doing is conquering and that's it. Now, David had a mission, but remember, David's mission was to conquer the land that was to be the promised land, because the Israelites had not even come close to establishing the borders that were the promised land borders that God gave them. True? So that being the case, David's different. He's trying to take what God said should be theirs, was to be theirs. God had declared it. So that's not the same. But I don't want you, oh Israelite king, to think that your job is to go throughout the ancient world and conquer everybody you see. Just because God's with you doesn't mean you have the license to be an evil, selfish, power-consumed person who puts everybody under your foot that you can, right? So the lesson that poses, I think, for us, or presents for us as believers is, okay, none of us probably is going to be a king or a president or a prime minister, right, of any nation. Probably we're not. So what is the significance to us? Well, guess what? I've seen in my life, I've worked, and I haven't just done ministry in my life. You know, I worked in factories in my late teens and early 20s. Okay, so I've worked in, you know, such similar places after that. I know what it's like. I know how people are. I know how cutthroat it can be to be in the corporate world, or even the blue collar world. It's a rough place to be, and people are cutthroat there. They will cut you down any chance they can. You can hardly survive without lying, right? So there are ways that you can become a local feudal lord yourself, even where you're employed, right? Taking power into your hands, crushing people underneath you. No, not with weapons, or, you're not drawing blood, but you're using your position that God gave you. God may have elevated you above others. Your position there is not to crush the people under you. It's to lift them up. It's to serve them. It's to help make them great at their jobs, right? Make them want to be there at work, doing what they're doing with you. So you need to be the kind of leader. You need to be the kind of middleman or middlewoman, who leads those that God puts under your charge with the characteristics that are the exact opposite of Nimrod. You're not just, out to climb the corporate ladder, stepping on everyone else to get there. No, you're there to serve in whatever position God puts you in, to put other people above yourself, and to give, expecting nothing in return, knowing that your reward comes from the Lord, and that He will see all you do for Him in that context. And the day will come where He will exalt you. Maybe not in this life, but boy, oh boy, He will exalt you. And great will be your reward. So take Nimrod's example as a blueprint of what not to do, even in a working situation or ministry situation, a place where you're part of the pecking order. Always remember, it's about putting God first. It's about putting others first, and trust like Jesus, right? When He was hanging on the cross, He put everyone else in front of Himself. He put His mother, He put the disciples above Himself, even though they were unfaithful to Him. He put the Romans who were torturing Him above Himself. He put the two guys on the crosses above Himself. And it wasn't until the very end that He says, I'm thirsty. Can I have something to drink? Right? So that's what you and I are. We're the people who invest everything in others and trust God's going to take care of us, even if it's just with a little bit, right? That's all it is. And even if it's vinegar, we'll be like Job and we'll say, Lord, though you slay me, yet will I trust in you. So there it is.
Dr. Petrovich, that was one of the most beautiful and pastoral ending we had when it comes to podcasting on this channel in a while. So thank you so much. I see that the audience are loving you. One of them says, please get him back. Okay, we'll do. Don't worry.
I'm cheap.
I also want
to hire.
Yeah, I also want to say that the same guy who said it and another one already ordered this book about Nimrod. So you got 2 more customers. Praise God. And lastly, this Sunday at 7 p.m., I'm welcoming a scientist who works for Dr. Hugh Ross's organization. So we'll be dissecting one of the Dr. Ross's book that's called Improbable Planet, and has to deal with the fine-tuning of the universe and how the universe had to be arranged in order to bring life. Yes, it will speak about old Earth. No, it will not support evolution. Even if you're a young Earth creationist like I used to be, now I'm simply, I don't know how old the Earth is, creationist. Yeah, but please come, please, open your mind, listen from a scientist. It won't be type of an episode that will be, oh, we're debating, we're attacking. No, it's about how God made everything pleasurable and enjoyable for us to make the habitat, how the Earth and the life on Earth can prosper, and how we can enjoy when it comes to oxygen, when it comes to gravity, when it comes to heat, when it comes to cool air, when it comes to so many things that God had to put in motion in order for life to thrive here and not on other places. So again, this will come this Sunday, 7 p.m. Dr. Petrovich, it was my utmost pleasure. Let's please keep in touch, and we'll see about some future topics whenever you're available, because I will hate taking 2 hours of your time in your busy schedule often. So we'll talk later about some other episode in the future. That being said, may God bless your work. May God bless your ministry. May God use you in many years to come when you're teaching your either congregation or students. And also when it comes to you guys, you've heard a bad example of how not to be like Nimrod. So be the opposite, be like Jesus, and, imitate him. Like Paul said, imitate him, like Paul was trying to do. And I know that many times we fail, but be encouraged that God is always standing there with open arms, waiting to spend time with you. Well, like he was doing in the Garden of Eden, in the cool of the day, he was walking and looking for Adam when he was hiding. You know what? It may surprise you, but God knows even before when we will sin, he knows that we'll do that. So he's not shocked. He knows you. He knows me very well. So be encouraged to come to God as you are and ask you to cleanse you and change you so you won't be the same. Same goes for you. Same goes for me. I don't want to be a hypocrite. We all sin, we're all flawed, but praise God for his loving mercy. That being said, see you Sunday. May God bless all of you, and thank you for being with us.